Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon. Hello? Hello, anybody out there? Okay, I'd like to welcome you today. Today's program is, as you can see, art in Sudbury artists. And before we start, though, I'd like to mention that next month's meeting is November 1st, and it's going to be Gold Treasure in Sudbury. And Dr. Tony House will be the director for that one. And refreshments after the program, they'll be up here, and they're free. There's no cost for those. And in the back, there is stuff for sale. There is a cost for that. Okay? So with that, we have the color outside, and we also have color inside. So Fred Scott will be our director or whatever you he will explain everything that's here. Okay, Fred Scott was also the owner of the Fred Scott Gallery. So Fred, if you will.
First, I want to take this opportunity to dedicate today's program to a man who was part of the community for a long time. I was lucky to be able to meet him. He was a photographer. He was in love with Sudbury's history and the nature of Sudbury. And luckily, he had the talent to document that and preserve it. And before he passed away, just recently, donated his personal archives to the Sudbury Historical Society. His widow and his children are here. I'd like to dedicate today's program to Stanley Klein. So, and thank you for coming. And when we get to his work, feel free to answer any questions or say anything you'd like to about it, what it was like to live with an artist, maybe. Anyway, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I graduated from Harvard College with a degree in government, which logically led to a long career in plastics. And that logically led to opening an art gallery here in Sudbury. Actually, I started hanging out with artists in college. I got to love art through artists, and I started collecting at a very early age. In a way, I started collecting art, I think, when I started collecting stamps as a kid. To me, art is really all-encompassing, and if any of you visited my gallery, and I know some of you did, you'll know that I had a very broad view of art, not like galleries that don't include crafty things. I loved quilts. A good friend of mine was a quilter. I had a lot of quilts, for instance. But I had photography and painting, sculpture, fiber, and music and poetry and everything else that I could think of to try to get people in the door. So I was living in Southborough at the time, and being kind of a government nerd, I frequently checked the town's website. I saw a notice about a house for rent and checked it out. My son went with me. One of the windows was unlocked, so I lifted him up, and he crawled in and came to the door and let me in, and we walked around. First time I've revealed that. But I ended up applying and actually writing a proposal, and kind of not immediately, but because the person that won the house, so to speak, was kind of freaked out by the solitude and the howling coyotes and fisher cats. She left after about a month, and I got it. So I'm in the Powers house. You know, most houses in New England, I find, are known as by the name of the person who lived in it before you. I was voted off the island in Southborough a few years ago. My house there is still called the Scott House, even though I'm not there anymore. So I came to Sudbury because of the gallery, and then I found that house, and the gallery's gone, but I'll stay in that house as long as the town will let me. It's just an incredible experience and a real honor to live there. So I've grown to love Sudbury. It's not real different from Southborough, but it's a place with just incredible nature, incredible history. I've learned about the nature by living in that house. I've learned a lot about the history by knowing Lee Swanson, and I've asked him a lot of questions over the years about some of the odd things back in the woods there where I live and in other places around Sudbury. So today's program is, this is a historical society. It's about the art that the society owns. It's really not an art show. It's really more about history. And, it happens to be centered around the art that the historical society owns. So what we wanted to do was reveal the contents of the collection, and this is pretty much it. There are a few other pieces, but there are some of these works we really don't know much about. There's some we don't even know who gave them to us, and there are others we know who gave them to us, but we don't know who the artist is. So I want to encourage you to stand up and let yourself be heard if you can help us solve any of these mysteries. If there are any of the works that we talk about today and you can add to what we know about them, please let us know. And you can either stand up and speak, or we'll come over to you and you can use a microphone. But we would love to learn more about what we have here. And I think that you people are the best people in town to try to get that information from. And the third purpose is to perhaps solicit future donations of art to the Sudbury Historical Society, because we would love to acquire more, whether it is important to Sudbury because it's about Sudbury, or because it's by a Sudbury artist. You can feel free to donate your own work or the work that you've acquired whenever you feel like it. And it'll be in good hands. So I'm not so much the presenter as kind of the master of ceremonies. I'll tell you what I know, and with Lee's help, you can share what you know. So we will begin with an artist who, we're going to start with her, not necessarily because she's Sudbury's best-known artist over the years, but because she's right here in the center, because there is so much of her work, and we could never afford to frame it all. So it's spread out here. And believe it or not, we had just enough space, so with just the right overlap, sort of not covering up any of the faces, we could fan them all out and include all of Florence Hosmer's work that is owned by the Historical Society. There are a couple other pieces that were significantly damaged that are not on display right here today. But after the program, it'd be great if you could come up here and sort of look through this whole gallery of, I assume, former residents of Sudbury. There are a lot of people, obviously a lot of families represented here. And sort of an equal number, I thought was interesting, of men and women. The men start here and go to here. The women start there and go to here. There's one in the middle, which is a woman, so I guess the women won in the numbers war. But perhaps you'll recognize some of these faces. And if you do, let us know. We have another very interesting piece. Well, as far as Mrs. Hosmer's work goes, we have these. We have that small painting, which is very nice. And then there are some watercolors, maybe some pencil sketches right here in this plastic box. And then the last piece that relates to her is not by her, but of her. And that's the portrait of Florence Hosmer by, was it Helen Flynn? Some of you may have known her. She was the wife of, I guess, a principal of one of the schools here in Sudbury. And we also have, very interestingly, her diaries and her class lecture notes from college, which was is now known as Mass Art. Before that, it was known as the Mass College of Art. I'm not sure what its official title was when she studied there around the turn of the century. I'd like to get some help here from Helen Marie Casey. There she is. You may know her. She's an authority on Mrs. Hosmer and her work, and she's going to add probably quite significantly to what I had to say and answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fred. And I want to pick up on the first thread that you laid out for us, and thank you all for giving me a little bit of this program on Miss Hosmer. I first want to thank loudly people like Lee Swanson, like Lee McLean, like Adolph Balco, who work so hard preserving what we have and making it available to us. I think so many people see old stuff and say, junk, let's toss it. And we would be at such a loss if that had happened with the old notebooks to which you referred, with drafts of art that we have available to us. And so thank you to the people who keep preserving it, seeing that it isn't lost to us. One of the things I want to say about Florence that strikes me, and I know how many of you here knew her. I never had the pleasure of knowing her except through her work and through her writings. I am so impressed that she knew early that she wanted to be an artist. And when you read the letters of her sister, of her mother, of her brothers, invariably those letters say, Florence is out painting. Florence is sketching. Florence has gone to Framingham to paint. Her sister will describe the easel that she's carrying, what she's taking, how it looks when it's finished. And what struck me when I first went to the Society's collection is how many drafts there were, and an interesting feature, since I'm not a painter, I was impressed by the fact that often on the back of a piece of work, Florence Hosmer would write how long it had taken her. And I thought, aha, we have some assignments here. And her teachers must have said to her, you have 2 hours or 1 hour, or don't spend more than an afternoon. And you see repetitions of things. For example, she must have been sent to the North End, and you see repeated sketches of Hanover Street. You see her, I think, working on perspective. And when you look at these paintings, you'll see that there are certain characteristics. You will see her placing a locket on a person. Later you'll notice in the Hosmer house the ribbons that may not have been worn by the person, but Miss Hosmer thought they reflected something she wanted to say. Now, she was a student in the Ogunquit group of writers in Summertimes, and the head of that was Charles Woodbury, who said, imply more than you can paint. And I think some of the symbols that you see of lockets, of light coming through a window, are to make you, by all that is presented and suggested, interpret more than she might have directly told you. And so, for example, in the painting in the Hosmer house, the self-portrait in the yellow suit, what I love about it is it's a study of sunshine, of copper, of a mood, and a jauntiness, a self-image that is so positive. But when I first met Miss Hosmer through the paintings here, I was struck by the remarkable melancholy in some of the faces. And also in the Hosmer house, there's a painting that was exhibited at the Danforth Museum, and the woman is in green, and there is a pensiveness to it. And so I invite all of you to join us in a quest to find out, why did Florence Hosmer fall off the charts of known artists? We in Sudbury know her, and we love her. Why is it the most recent book on the Ogunquit painters, she's not even mentioned. And yet, if you look at her work, there are paintings of the studio of Charles Woodbury. She won prizes. She had the John Singer Sargent Studio on Newbury Street. The Boston Herald, early in the century, named her one of the foremost women artists in Boston. But if you walked down the streets in Boston and you stopped and you asked people, I bet money they wouldn't know who Florence Hosmer is. What is it that has made this happen? I feel convinced that we have to bring her back into the sunshine. And so I want to say just a few more things, but I want to leave that thought with you. I want to say, not only from the beginning did she know she wanted to be an artist and treat herself like an artist by practicing her signature, F-A-H, Florence Arms Hosmer, recording the time it took, repeating the drawings. But she worked in earnest, and the notebooks to which Fred referred tell us that. She studied at the Normal Art School, she got her degree, she taught art, and then she tried to make her living creating portraits and selling them. She worked through the hard times, through the Depression. She worked through the Second World War. She was convinced that women artists should be paid as much as men artists were paid, and she had a very hard time with that. Most people of whom she made portraits wanted to pay less because she was a woman artist. She studied with Joseph de Camp, who was known for fluid handling of paint and the confident modeling of heads, which you see, I think, with the heads right here. She worked with Albert Munsell, who wrote a great deal about color and created a color chart. She worked with Anson Cross. She worked with Charles Woodbury. In addition, these were competitive memberships. She was a member of the Copley Society, judged by her peers, a member of the Mass Women's Club, the Cambridge Art Association, the Boston Art Club, the Copley Society, the director of the John Singer Sargent Studios. So she was highly respected in her time. And I would say in summary about this, I don't think all of her work is equal. But I think the work that is superior stands up to the best that was being done in the time. And so I hope all of you will think a little bit more about this puzzle. And if you happen to own any letters from Florence, or you happen to have bought portraits, I hope you'll let Lynn or Fred or Lee or me know, because I think there's a narrative we want to create. In fact, I'll tell you, I have a commitment from a publisher, Black Lawrence Press, to publish a biography of Florence. It has to be finished by next June. So I'm eager for help, and I thank you for listening to all of this. I'll answer questions afterwards if you like. Thank you, Fred.
Sure. Actually, if people have questions now, we can do that, or we'll save them to the end, I guess. Okay. I'm intrigued by these portraits. You wonder, why do we have these? Some of them we might have because she didn't consider them her best work. What's interesting is that, most of these you can tell by the way that they're dressed that these were pretty well-established people. And they didn't just sit still for hours for her to have her do a portrait and then not do anything with it. So it's interesting to me. Yes?
Some of the finished ones of those are hanging in the Hosmer House.
Well, I thought that some of these might be studies.
Right.
And in fact, there's one woman whose image shows up here 2 or 3 times. You can recognize her. There's little or no information at all on the backs of these
We
canvases.
have just completed an appraisal of 420 of her paintings, and we have a lot of nomenclature on each painting, and some of them would relate to some of these, so maybe in the future, Lee and I can
Cross-reference
get
those collections.
together on that.
That's great. I'm not an expert in portraiture, but I think I think she was a very, very talented artist. And the only person I can think of to ask, and you may have already, but the oldest gallery on Newbury Street is the Vose Gallery, V-O-S-E, and they are incredibly knowledgeable about artists from New England.
And to pick up on what you just said, Florence Hosmer did complete a portrait of the governor of Vermont, which is no small thing. She did do many of the members of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, including Yves Chardon, a cellist, whose work was just featured in a glass case, not her art, someone else's of him, but it's a beautiful portrait with his cello. She did also do a portrait of the superintendent of schools in the Midwest, and it hangs in their historical society. And so part of the problem, I think, is we simply, in all that we've looked at, don't have the record. I think you're exactly onto it when you say these were studies. We don't have what she sold, and we don't know what she sold because we don't have a piece of paper that tells us, but it is out there. And most recently, Lynn and Adolph just became aware of 3 portraits in Vermont done by Florence. So I'm convinced there is much of it out there. Valuable work, good work. We just have to be detectives and find it.
Good luck with that. Well, next I'd like to talk about an artist whose work is very different. Over here, there are 2 3-panel screens. Each screen has 15 works. These are actually not the original works. Correct me if I'm wrong. These are photographic copies, so that the originals, can be perfectly preserved. These are works of Gertrude Rice, and I came to last month's program, which was all about the Rice family, and don't remember a thing about her from that program, except that they referenced these same panels. Anyway, they're wonderful. I call them botanical sketches, and there's also a photograph of Gertrude Rice herself on one of the back sides of one panel on each of the 2 screens. So take a look there, and if you stop at the back table on the way out, you can take some home with you, because I guess we have some note cards featuring her work that are for sale. Next is an artist who some of you probably knew, and we have a lot of her work, partly because she was probably very prolific, but partly it's because she either did it for a living or she at least did work commercially. Her name was Helene Sherman, and is Barbara Taskovitz here? Okay, I don't know if you know her, but Barbara Taskovitz, I only mention it because she knows a heck of a lot more about Helene Sherman and her work than I do. Someone that if you're interested in learning more about her, you might want to seek out Barbara Taskovitz. But her work would be considered graphic art, mostly. There's some quote-unquote fine art as well, represented by a couple of, I think, pen and ink or pencil on paper sketches of, evidently she made a trip to England. So these 2 pieces right here are Helene Sherman's. All the rest of these works are Mrs. Sherman's, and it ranges from greeting card work. These 4 pieces and some of the ones in the back were samples, perhaps, practice pieces, pieces she did just to keep a record. of work that she did for a company called the Marion Heath Card Company, which was in Sudbury, Mass. I'm not sure over what period of time, but the work that she has that's represented here was from 1940 to 1949. Did someone have something to add?
No, I was just saying, she just lived down here on Concord Road, as did Helene. No, that's all.
So Marion Heath lived on Concord Road, and so did Helene. And some of the other work, and there are prayers, there are sort of in honor of or certificates of appreciation, and then there's some wonderful poems. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Omar Khayyam, Shakespeare, and Goethe. These are, well, if she had lived, 500 years earlier, she would have made a living, and a good one, copying books, because that's how books were made before the printing press, and they were, I think, called illuminated manuscripts. And she referred to these, or at least in the Sudbury Historical Society's records, they're referred to as illuminations, and they are on paper, on vellum, and on parchment, and on something called fake parchment. She used watercolor, ink, probably India ink, and gold, as in gold leaf. And really beautiful work, and such a range of applications when you look at from the greeting cards to the certificates to the poems and the prayers. And we're lucky to have these. I should mention also that most, if not all, of the works that the Society owns that are framed and ready to hang are available on loan. Only a couple of times has that been taken advantage of, and there are a couple of pieces that hang in, I think, in the Flynn building. And I'm not sure if they're available on loan to private citizens or to organizations, businesses, offices. Okay. So incorporate yourself if you want to hang one. Next, there are 5 pieces here by Thelma McAlpine Ernst. And one piece is what I would call embroidery. It's referred to as crewel, spelled C-R-E-W-E-L. And I don't know if embroidery is the proper term as well, if they're probably not precisely interchangeable. I see a lot of heads shaking no. I'd love to have someone explain it.
It's a type of embroidery.
Okay.
Crewel, it uses a certain kind of wool. So it's different from traditional embroidery that uses thread
Okay.
of various sorts.
And this is listed in the archives as wool on linen. And I'm not sure what year this piece. Oh, this piece is from 1964. It's called Blue Urn with Mixed Flowers, and I think it's held up really well in terms of the color. It's from 1964. There's another piece from 1965 that I have seen a picture of, and I'd hope to display it, but it's been taken out of its frame and it's rolled up and in a tube. But it's called Jacobean Design, and it's really nice. I really like that piece, and I have a picture of it over here, which you can look at if you'd like. There are also these 4 watercolors, and these were done in 1993, 94, and 95. This is the Red Horse Tavern. These 2 are early Stagecoach Bridge and Old Stagecoach Bridge number 2. And the piece on the bottom is called Wayside Inn Gristmill, oddly enough. And these are watercolors on paper. This is kind of unusual. This actually is 2/94, 9/95. I've never actually seen an artist do that, so she actually included the month as well as, and that's interesting. So that's Thelma McAlpine Ernst. The next artist, whom we unfortunately only have one piece because it's very nice. I am not sure. I thought it looked like a pastel. Lee said he didn't think so, and he also said, "I hope not." And that was very wise of him because pastels are notoriously very fragile. If you have any pastels or works that you might think are pastel, treat them, very carefully. They'll hold up if they're handled gently, but the powder, the chalk will, fall off. And if you have one that's been framed for a long time, sometimes you'll see, some sort of shavings, droppings, whatever, along the bottom. But this is called Purple Tulips, and if anyone knows actually what the medium is, I'd love to know. Yes, is it? Thank you. Well, let's be careful with it, Lee.
I knew it.
Good. Again, that was Jane Brown. And unfortunately, that's the only piece we have by her. The next piece, I sort of switched the order on myself, but this piece here, with all due respect to the much beloved Florence Hosmer and the late Stanley Klein and the artists who we may love, this is my favorite piece. Because, number one, the Hudson River School was kind of the first big genre of art that I fell in love with. And this is a true Hudson River School piece. The second reason that I love it is because the person who donated this to the society was Leona Johnson. And because of where I live, I sort of feel a connection to her. There's still a tree that is lying across Hop Brook, just over the berm from my house, that the story goes before the Boy Scout bridge was installed there, she used to clamber over that log, that tree, and it's still there, and I know that she's been gone for a number of years. So Leona Johnson lived on Old Lancaster Road, and she was, before she became a Johnson, she was a Johnston. Did I get that right? And this painting is by Thomas Johnston, and he was her great uncle. And there's a wonderful little sketch on the back. And this is in, I assume this is in her hand, and it has the title and the name of the artist. So it's Ausable Lake, the Adirondacks. Adirondacks is not spelled the way most of us spell it now, A-D-I-R. It's spelled A-D-A-R. And that probably isn't a mistake. That's probably how it was spelled then, or you had your choice. And it says, by Thomas Johnston, before 1870, which makes it one of, if not the oldest piece in the collection. And then it has this genealogy here, Thomas Johnson - William Johnson brothers, and then arrows going down to George H. Johnston, son, Leona C. Johnston, daughter, Robert N. Johnson, son, and an arrow, Bob's great-great-uncle. So Bob Johnson was her son, and Thomas Johnson, the painter, was his great-great-uncle, which I guess would make him her great-uncle. Anyway, and probably more of that than you wanted to hear. This is, I'm sure, an oil on canvas or linen, and it's a really nice piece. A lot of the Hudson River works would have a deer in it, and there's a deer right there. And not so common is they're actually a couple of people in here, a couple of fishermen in a little boat. And I guess the story is that the family didn't like the painting so much. And I guess no one wanted it, so the town ended up with it, or the Historical Society ended up with it. Anyway, next, sort of skipping one, but this is another cruel work, and since some of you seem pretty knowledgeable about this kind of work, you might know who the artist is, because we don't. There's a date, 1972, and there's a name, Jane, and that's it. There's no other information available on this piece. These are scenes from Sudbury, pretty much all recognizable as either real locations or events. And around the edge it says, as ancient is this hostelry as any in the land may be. So, anybody know?
I have the same thing at home, which I've completed, but I put the Red Horse Tavern sign in the middle where they have scroll that you can't read.
I know, she
And
started out trying to be legible and sort of gave up.
And I got the print from Lorraine Williams, who lived on Summer Street in Sudbury in the 70s. But I don't know who this Jean or Joan is.
A blank. It was a diagram.
Right, yes. It's a bat.
Well, thank you for that. There was at least a name. Maybe it was one of her neighbors, or... I know that Sudbury has a tradition. There have been, perhaps there was then, for Cruel, a group of women. Rebecca Cutting, she's not here today, is she? So she won't mind me saying that she told me last month that a number of artists, her mother included, were part of this group of, she called them little old widow ladies, who were artists. And there was a group, I think, that may have even been somewhat formally known as the Sudbury watercolorists. There was a group, and it may have been the same group, it may have been a different group, of women that lived on or around Goodman's Hill Road. So I found that interesting, but don't know much more about it. This next piece I like a lot too. It's a little bit towards the kind of what people would call primitive or outsider art, probably not by an artist who was formally trained. Lee refers to him as a starving artist. I think it's the nicer way to put it would be to say primitive, or outsider art is really the term now. The only information that we have on it is a set of initials, NH. NH. And the information we have besides that just comes from its ownership, and that is that it was owned by the Walker family, and that it was in Walker's house on Goodman's Hill Road. It's called, at least in the record, Snowy Barn. And the story goes that they liked the painting, they bought it somewhere because it reminded them of an old barn that they used to have there on that property on Goodman's Hill Road, a barn which was at one point moved to New Hampshire. So I kind of like that piece. Now, am I blocking something? Oh, I sure am. This piece is by Ellie Godfrey Harding Robinson, today's artist with the longest name. That's Ellie Godfrey Harding Robinson. And I believe she was born in 1894. And Lee tells me that he thinks or knows this was painted in 1971. 60s. So it is watercolor on paper, and it's titled 18th Century Still Life. So it was done in the 20th century by someone born in the 19th century, but of 18th century artifacts. And that's the only piece that we own by Ms. Robinson. It's a very nice still life, though. Now I'm going to scoot across the room. Probably the person filming is going to hate me for doing this, but the alternative was Lee thought that the way that we might do this show was sort of like an auction where we had a crew of worker bees carrying the paintings up to the front one at a time. And I don't know, I thought I'd be less nervous if I could just walk around, but everybody's going to have a stiff neck by the time we're done. I'm sorry. But now you get to look on the other side, and maybe it'll even out. These next pieces are by a photographer who lived on Haynes Road in Sudbury, also not so very long ago that some of you might have known him. His name was Vic Newmeyer. And there are a lot of photographs of his here. This first set maybe even includes people in them who are here, but certainly you might know some of the people. These are all of the Sudbury Savoyards, and the 3 or 4 different shows of theirs are represented, at least from that. And this is Pirates of Penzance, I'm pretty sure. These are another performance of another Gilbert and Sullivan play. I'm not sure which one. This is from a play titled Town Meeting Tonight. I'm pretty sure. The other way around. These are from Town Meeting Tonight, and this is from 1776. Then he had a pretty wide range, and he liked to get around because these are from not only Sudbury. This is obviously Sudbury. We're pretty darn sure these are too. Maybe even Haynes Meadow back where I live. These 4 we're absolutely unsure about. We don't recognize them as any particular place in Sudbury. They might be, or from some surrounding town. And then yes? Okay. All the rest, those on the bottom, are from Sturbridge Village. So he liked Sturbridge Village a lot. And he got some really great portraits of the role players there in action. And then there's this, which I just thought was maybe even a mistake, that somebody had just inserted it in with the rest of the pictures, sort of as to keep everything else protected or straight or flat. It's just so different from everything else. And the only thing I could think of was Raytheon. I don't know if anyone here knew Vic Newmeyer or knew if he did any commercial work. This is with his work. We're pretty sure it's Vic Newmeyer's. Pretty sure it's of somebody very carefully doing some work with a laser. It's an interesting photograph, though. Love to know more about it. That's what we know. Last but not least, Stanley Klein. Stanley left us with virtually everything from his work. I believe hundreds, if not thousands, of slides of work. And so this is just a small representation of the work that he did documenting historic and natural wonders of Sudbury. I can see why he loved Sudbury, and he was inspired by the natural world of Sudbury because of where he lived. This is, I'm told, his backyard. There's a blue heron here. It's called blue heron at a pond's edge, and just great fall colors. I don't know if the Klein family can acknowledge whether this is kind of what it looks like this week, probably. So, thank you for sharing this with us. He has work in black and white, he has work in color, and there are places that he visited over and over again, as a lot of artists will do, but we're lucky enough to have some examples. For instance, the gristmill at the Wayside Inn in the winter covered in snow, and in the spring or summer with green trees surrounding it. And then this is probably Cavicchio's. Yeah. There's an article here, which you may recall was in the Metro West Daily News back a few years ago. And that pretty much concludes our program. I think I hit on everything. One thing I want to say before I forget is that when the screen goes up and you dash for the refreshments and you grab your coffee, please, these are all unprotected, and just don't go over here with your coffee. Yes?
I have a couple of comments about Helene Sherman. She also published a book, Words of Light, with all her calligraphy in the book. It was published by Little Brown. And she also was quite famous with miniature books, this size.
Oh.
And she did a lot of them. I don't know how many. More than that.
I'm glad that you mentioned the term calligraphy, because I forgot to say that's sort of the one thing in common with all of her work, that style of writing.
Yes. And she, as far as I know, is the only one that published a book listing most of, or a lot of her small poems and religious poems.
Pretty big publisher too, Little Brown.
Right.
Thank you. Well, does anyone have any questions of me? I probably can't answer it, or of each other, or anything that you'd like to say or suggest for the future as far as the Historical Society's art collection. And you're hungry. Thank you. Thanks for coming out on such a beautiful fall afternoon as well. And thanks, Lee.